Hi, I'm Leonard Maltin,
This is Jerry Beck.
and we're here to talk about the UPA cartoons, also known in this case as the Jolly Frolics.
Yes. I'm sure that they came up with that title themselves.
No, I'm sure they didn't. I'm sure Columbia Pictures thought of that because, after all, we'd had Silly Symphonies, Looney Tunes, Merry Melodies, et cetera, so they had to have some sort of an overall umbrella title for these one-shot cartoons. And there's the logo of UPA, United Productions of America.
Which became the studio in the 1950s. These cartoons that they started doing and releasing through Columbia Pictures really put them on the map and influenced everything. Influenced animation, influenced Hollywood, influenced Walt Disney.
Changed the face of animation worldwide, really. It may seem very conventional to watch a cartoon like this today. It may not strike you as being particularly unusual, especially since it stars the Fox and Crow, who were established characters in the 1940s in the Columbia Pictures cartoons, and in comic books, too.
Right. The DC Comics printed Fox and Crow adventures and kept doing it all through the late 1960s, and I grew up with the Fox and Crow comics. I didn't even know they were cartoon characters because they never reran these cartoons on TV.
Exactly. So UPA, which had been struggling to survive, doing first wartime films during World War II and then industrial and sponsored films, finally got this tremendous break from Columbia Pictures, which was willing to give them a chance to hire them on a contract basis to make individual cartoons for theatrical release. And remember, these cartoons were not made for TV. These were made in the days when every time you went to a movie theater, you got a cartoon with the feature film, along with a newsreel and other staples of the short subject program.
Columbia wanted some insurance because the UPA was a totally new studio. They had only been making industrial films, government films. They had some new ideas on lower budget techniques to do cartoons in a different way than had been traditionally done. Columbia had their own studio for about 2 decades, doing Fox and Crow and Little Abner and traditional cartoons. And by the end of the war, they realized they really couldn't afford keeping this going. It wasn't really something that a low-budget studio like Columbia could keep going. And we're looking for, if there was somebody with an alternative, UPA filled the bill.
So the deal was Columbia would give them a tryout if they would use Columbia's characters, the Fox and Crow. Well, this was not what the UPA guys really wished to be doing, but they figured, all right, we'll give it a try. This may get our foot in the door with a major distributor and give us a leg up to becoming a real full-time, profitable studio. So that's why they accepted the Fox and Crow. But they wanted to do it with some of their modern ideas. And what they really wanted to do was to use modern graphic and modern art ideas and apply them to the traditional animated cartoon.
John Hubley, who was the creative director for the studio and was the director of this cartoon and the initial cartoons of UPA, he was the guy who had the vision. He had the point of view, to really rebel against what was the established norm of animated cartoons. That was
look at this
Disney
audience.
style.
Look at the way the audience is drawn.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those heads are just scribbles. And they're not fully drawn, they're not fully rendered human beings sitting in that audience. And their feeling was, no one will care.
Right. Well, even the backgrounds, the Fox and the Crow stand out against these backgrounds because they're really three-dimensional characters. They're fully rounded, whereas even the backgrounds are flat and, again, more like modern art. This cartoon also uses a great original idea of the magician's baton, causing magic tricks to make things go out of control. This, of course, was used later by Tex Avery in Magical Maestro at MGM, and even Pixar sort of took this on.
So they weren't trying to revolutionize content in this cartoon. This is a traditional, funny cartoon.
Yeah.
And that's what Columbia wanted.
Yeah.
Columbia didn't really care what it looked like so long it was funny, and so long as audiences responded to it. That was the deal. If audiences didn't mind or didn't pay attention to these changes or innovations in the graphic design, Columbia didn't give a hoot.
It's just hard for us to imagine today. We see all sorts of different styles of animation, techniques of animation, but back in the 40s, the mindset was animation was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs or Bugs Bunny or Donald Duck, and anything else was nobody even thought to do anything else. But that's what John Hubley and the creatives at UPA fought to do and did do with this series of Jolly Frolics.
The irony is that almost everybody at UPA had worked for Walt Disney. Virtually the entire staff, almost all of them, had worked for Disney during the glory years of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Fantasia and Pinocchio. And they loved what they were doing then, but then they felt that they were getting into a rut. And there was also, of course, that terrible labor strife at Disney in the early 40s, and a lot of the UPA guys were involved in that strike in 1941. So that strike led to them leaving, in many cases, joining the Screen Gem studio over at Columbia, in many cases, and ultimately winding up with their own studio, UPA.
Right.
But they had that background of traditional animation as well as their own art training. And they brought all of that to bear in these cartoons.
Right. The thing that people confuse about UPA cartoons is that they feel like they're cheaper or they're low budget or limited animation, that kind of thing. They are cheaper. There is less animation, but it's the way it's done. It's not done intentionally to be cheap or it's all done with an artistic eye, with a certain aesthetic.
It's really stylized animation rather than limited animation.
Right. And this like we've said before, it revolutionized everybody's thinking about what animation can be, what it can show, and how entertaining it can be.
Absolutely. So once UPA proved itself to Columbia and made these 3 Fox and Crow cartoons that they made, the first one of which actually won them an Oscar nomination, they were home free.